We see actors in movies and TV shows around us all the time, but have you ever wondered how they actually get hired? Is it all nepotism, hard work, or is it the raw power of being born extremely lucky? In this video, I'm going to pull back the curtain on how someone would go about landing an acting job. Whether you're dreaming of breaking into the industry yourself or just curious about the behind-the-scenes process, let me shine a light for you on how all this works, because the nepotism part isn't fully wrong or right. But who am I to talk about all this? Let me introduce myself. My name is James Tang. I've been an actor in LA for almost 10 years. I've been on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, NCIS LA, and I was recently cast as my first lead role in a feature film called To Die Alone, hopefully coming soon. So I know a thing or two about getting cast and not getting cast. The acting industry is pretty high profile, but even if you took a theater class in school, you probably never got an idea of how an actor actually gets a job, other than how they did it in high school, which was audition for something and then maybe you get cast. I ran a poll recently on my social media asking what non-actors thought the steps were into getting an acting role, just to see what people thought the process was and if there's any misconceptions. I do want to say only about 2 or 3 people actually listed steps out, so I want to congratulate and thank you for actually reading the instructions, and for the rest of you, I'm not mad or disappointed. I'm actually not even surprised. Anyway, nepotism. This was a popular one, and yes, this can be a way for someone to get a role. But nepotism also does not guarantee that someone will have a long-lasting career, and there's also a lot of people that can get jobs without nepotism, such as myself. I am someone that booked the roles that I have without having any sort of prior connections before I moved to Hollywood. So yeah, nepotism can land you a role, but it's not the only way. It's also not a step-by-step process. Starting younger. I would say starting younger can have an advantage because there does seem to be a bias in hiring younger actors with little to no experience, especially if they happen to look like a younger version of like a big name actor in the project they're casting for, versus hiring an older actor with little to no experience. At the same time, there's a lot of child actors who have like 6 to 10 years of work on their resume before we hear about them in their breakout role. And we're also not hearing about the dozens, if not hundreds of child actors that end up not making it. Also, starting younger is not necessarily a step-by-step process. Knowing the right people or networking. This is super important, and if you think about it, nepotism is kind of just knowing the right people at like the highest level. For the rest of us peasants, networking is really important because let's say you meet a director that really likes you and likes your work and you like them, and if they're working on a project, they could just ask you to audition for it. Doesn't guarantee you'll get the job, but depending on their pull, they could offer it to you. Yes, sometimes a director actually can't just give you a job. This depends on a lot of different things, including the type of project, like TV versus film. But yes, networking is super important, but maybe not the entirety of the process. Finding the right roles. This implies that we as actors can actually pick and choose what roles we audition for, but that's not really a luxury most of us get, especially starting out. There are websites that can list roles online, like Actors Access or casting networks, who sometimes have predatory practices because they're the only websites the industry uses and nobody has the time or energy to try to create new ones, so they have a monopoly and might try to take advantage of desperate actors that we can submit to. But the only choice we have in this matter is whether or not we decide to send in our job application, basically. It's actually up to whoever's in charge of casting that decides whether or not we actually get to audition. Also, all those roles we see on TV and movies, 99.9% of them aren't even accessible by the general public. I'll get back to that in a bit. So how would an actor actually get a job? Let me take you through like a standard level 1 process of what that would be like. Let's say you're using those casting websites I mentioned before. And on those websites, they will list out roles. And so you're scouring through those and you see a role that you feel like you'd be good for. So you submit to it. And when I say submit, that usually means sending a headshot, your resume, and if you have them, like a clip or 2 of your acting. And then whoever is in charge of casting, like I mentioned before, will then decide whether or not they feel you might be right for the part and then send you an audition request or a self-tape request. A self-tape is basically doing an audition but filming it at home. After the pandemic, a lot of auditions became self-tapes, but there's still a lot of in-person ones too. Then depending on the project and how much time and money they have, they might give you a callback, which basically just means like whittling down the first auditioners down into a group of like 6 to 8. And then that might be seen by more decision makers like producers or directors or maybe network executives. And then if you're the one that they all agree on, or at least the majority does, you get the job. Pretty simple, right? Well, where does an agent or manager come in, you might ask? Remember those 99.9% of movie and TV roles I mentioned before? Well, if and when you get an agent or manager, they would basically do the same things we do in terms of submitting to a project or even pitching, but they have access to those movie and TV roles that the regular public and unrepresented actors don't. This may seem unfair, which I get, but I also get the other side in that one role can get thousands of submissions. And the job of both casting and the decision makers on the project is to whittle all that down to one. The process as a whole might be flawed, but unfortunately that's kind of just the best way it's worked that people have figured out over the last 100 years or so. If someone can figure out an even better way, I feel like you would probably make a lot of money or make a lot of people's lives easier. Either way, that's kind of why it can be frustrating for actors to hear like a non-actor say, "Oh, why don't you go and audition for that show?" Because we don't really have the choice to do that. Something to remember though is that this is a business where a lot of people are just trying to keep their jobs. And when there's a lot of money involved in a project, people also want to take on as little risk as possible. Sometimes these auditions are actually just backup options because the role has already been offered out to a few well-known actors, which we just call names, and or actors that casting is already more familiar with have already auditioned for the role and were just not deemed the right fit, or they just ended up turning it down. So something we hear a lot in the acting world is that just getting an audition alone is a win. Whether or not that's delusional is up for debate and can probably fill up an entire other video. For some actors, they get to a point where they become offer only. That means production will offer them the role without even needing to audition, usually because they already are considered low risk and have a built-in audience. And that just means more eyeballs, and more eyeballs means more money, and this industry loves money. And that's when an actor gets to a level where they can choose their own roles, or they're just a nepo baby. So that's basically the gist of how an actor could go about getting a job. If you can't already tell, this industry is pretty tough. Thanks for sticking around, and hopefully that was eye-opening for you. And if you actually want to know more details about this process, here's a video I made about how I would become an actor if I could start over from the beginning.